about the oshkaabewis methods of research. She learned about them in her courses from the Masters of Indigenous Knowledge Philosophy program at the Seven Generations Education Institute, which is nestled between Couchiching First Nation Reserve and Fort Frances, Ontario, on Agency 1 land. I watched my mother experience the oshkaabewis process of looking back at herself and evaluating how she had personally been affected by colonization before returning to the teachings she was given by Keewaydinoquay, and then synthesizing them into written form. She struggled in writing this book because the effects of colonization on her own mind told her that it contained knowledge that would be dismissed by those raised with value systems from non-native cultures. I believe that listeners of this book, regardless of their backgrounds, will go through a decolonizing process themselves as they listen to this book and explore another system of keeping knowledge. To those consuming this book with the blinders of colonization, the connections to plants that my mother makes on many levels, involving so many senses, may seem irrelevant or misplaced in scholarly work. To listen to this book and view it as the scholarly work that it is, listeners will have to ignore the image that dominant culture frequently portrays of primitive native people, cultures, stories, and knowledge-keeping systems. Our people are not childlike. Our cultures are not limited to the creation of fire and stone tools. Our stories are not fairy tales meant only to entertain children. And our knowledge is not simplistic. When we ignore these misconceptions, we are in a more open state of mind to accept the idea that plants are other beings with whom we can interact and communicate. And their stories and talents, from the trivial to the essential, are vital to our continued interaction with them. Keewaydinoquay. Keewaydinoquay always said that the year of her birth was not recorded until many years after the event, but her official birth year is 1918. This is also the year her mother wrote on a letter addressed to her own father, Keewaydinoquay's grandfather, as a year she gave birth. Keewaydinoquay spent much of her childhood in an Anishinaabe village on Cathead Bay, on the tip of the Leelanau Peninsula in Lower Michigan. Like many Michigan tribes in the first half of the 20th century, the band into which Keewaydinoquay was born was not federally recognized at the time of her birth. She began her training as a medicine woman when she was approximately 9 years old and was apprenticed to Nojamaquay, a well-respected Mushkikiwakay in the village. Keewaydinoquay had a lifelong interest in all kinds of education. She was an elementary and secondary teacher for years, and she held several master's degrees. In 1976, she began working on a doctorate in biology at the University of Michigan. But although she completed the coursework for the degree, she was not able to pass the required German proficiency examination and therefore could not take her preliminary exams or write her dissertation. She was teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee when my mother met her in the early 1980s. My mother was her student, her teaching assistant, and eventually her oshkaabewis, her traditionally trained Anishinaabe apprentice. With this book, my mother fulfills her promise to Keewaydinoquay that she would preserve and pass on this knowledge. My role as editor. My mother had already written a complete book-length manuscript when I joined her as editor of this project. I reorganized the original manuscript and suggested additions and deletions. But this book is entirely my mother's work, and it is her voice that audiences hear. The majority of my contribution concerns Ojibwe words, phrases, and plant names. Listeners do learn about me, however. I am the child my mother refers to in various stories as my daughter Makuntz. Plant names. Ojibwe plant names are used throughout this book. All of the Ojibwe plant names that Keewaydinoquay gave to my mother are here, plus, in some cases, names from other sources are used, especially for plants where Keewaydinoquay did not know an Ojibwe name. The names from other sources are included out of respect for Keewaydinoquay, who always tried.